to Who Charted. My name is Manish Khatta, and as always, I have with me Dan Russo. Let's get after it, sir.
6 charts in 6 minutes. Let's go. I think the big theme that you're going to see in all 6 charts here is that it is a U.S. large cap story. So we can kind of see that in the Global Dow index. Third week in a row that the Global Dow has closed below its 50-day moving average, the red line on the chart. Now, in theory, the structure of the uptrend off of the March lows from last year remains intact. Had a little bit of a kick save last week with the week Monday open, and then it rallied for equities across the board throughout the rest of the week. So uptrend still intact, but wavering here as we close below the 50-day or the 10-week moving average for the third consecutive week. But to me, the real story here is the relative chart at the bottom of the screen there. Relative to the S&P 500, the Global Dow has just been unable to gain any sort of upside traction when a lot of the value and a lot of the international markets started to work higher in November. Global Dow went along for the ride. However, it has subsequently stalled here in the March, April, May timeframe, and is now moving lower relative to the S&P 500. So once again, U.S. investors seem to be rewarded for maintaining a home country bias.
It's an S&P story. It's an S&P story. That's the title of Who Charted this week. As you can see on the top, I have the S&P 500 that consistently is making new highs. And on the middle panel is the Russell 3000 advanced decline line, and below that is a continuation of Dan's chart with the S&P Global Dow. Listen, you can look at breadth, you can look at internationals, you can look at things like transports. There is deterioration underneath the surface of the market, but it doesn't matter because the way the S&P is weighted, you can have the S&P continue to rise higher. And ultimately, we're in this business to make money. So if the S&P is the only thing that's going up, then just buy the S&P and stop messing around with all these charts. This is the theme right now. Will this continue? We'll see. But the bottom line is right now it's an S&P story. There is deterioration, but who cares? Just buy the market and move on until that story changes.
And with it being mostly an S&P story and understanding how the S&P is made up, the biggest weights in the S&P 500 are largely, for the most part, considered growth stocks. So if you look at the S&P 500 growth index, this is a daily chart, right? We closed on Friday at record levels, actually closed at the top end of the weekly range. Nice, steadily rising 50-day and 200-day moving averages. And every time this index pulls back, the 14-day RSI never reaches an oversold position. The traditional definition of oversold being a 30 level on the RSI never gets there. So that tells us that there's still upside momentum behind the move in prices. And what's interesting now is we're knocking on the door of relative highs against the S&P 500. Growth is on the cusp of surpassing the high that was reached last September. I believe it was actually September 1st. So 11 months of kind of going nowhere on a relative basis. That could change, and this is a huge week if you look at some of the individual names that are scheduled to report earnings.
I have the S&P on the top and the volume ratio on the bottom. And the volume ratio is basically NYSE advancing volume divided by declining volume. We look at a lot of things at Potomac when it comes to the market, especially market internals, new highs, new lows, advanced decline, as well as volume. Something that's interesting that happened recently is one of what we would consider a volume burst. So basically when advancing volume over declining volume reaches a certain point in the last 60 days, you have this upward thrust in the market. As you can see from the chart, this happened way back around the March lows and then again in June. And it's interesting that it's happening now at a new all-time high, which a lot of times these volume bursts sometimes happen coming off of bottoms, right? Intuitively, you get this big thrust higher. So at least in the short term, you have the S&P making a new high, you have a volume burst as well. You gotta respect the data, and so who cares about the deterioration when you're getting this kind of activity in terms of volume? So just something to keep an eye on here as we move forward.
All right, so we talked about growth breaking out. A lot of times when you hear growth, you immediately think technology, but I think you have to be smart when you're thinking about where you're looking within the technology landscape. As we've said, it's very much a U.S. large cap story. Taking a look at the S&P 600 Information Tech Index, or small cap tech, had a monster run in the fourth quarter of last year along with the rest of the small cap landscape, but has effectively done nothing throughout the first half or first 7 months of 2021. You can see that we've gone from a nice steady uptrend into this sloppy sideways consolidation, moving back and forth above and below 50-day moving average. 50-day moving average about as flat as you can get. So being selective obviously makes a lot of sense. All right, growth doing well. That doesn't mean you just blindly look at growth sectors of the market. You still have to kind of drill down and think a little bit more objectively about what's happening. And within the small cap landscape, tech is a solid sideways pattern. A lot of opportunity to chop yourself up and get in trouble.
So Dan, you and I were talking the other day about the Bollinger Band indicator that we have, and you had mentioned, what's funny is every time it comes to the lower end of its Bollinger Band, it's actually pushing up against the 50-day moving average. Now, these moving averages, look, they're out there. People talking about them a lot. Sometimes they don't work. I think this is just an interesting chart in the sense that every single decline recently has been bought up, and it coincides with the 50-day. I mean, it's just amazing how markets in turmoil, people are freaking out over these 3 to 5% declines, and they're getting bought up every single time. How long will that continue? Who the hell knows? But the trend is in place, and as long as there's a trend in place, you got to ride that puppy until it's over. And so we'll see what happens going forward, but we'll be back to talk about Who Charted to let you know how it goes. Dan, anything else?
That's it, everyone. Thanks for checking out Who Charted. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. We'll be back to you soon with updated thoughts. Thanks, everyone.